Why, hello there. You know, I heard a rumor that you were interested in learning how to play Dungeons & Dragons. You've heard about the game, you might have some friends who play, and you are, shall we say, D&D curious. Don't worry, it's okay. It's nothing to be shy about. In fact, you should be congratulated, for you have come to the right place. This is D&D University. And my name's Colby. I've been playing the game for several years. I've been YouTubing about it for quite some time now, and I suppose I'll be your professor if you'll have me. So this is D&D 101, the first course in a series of videos that I'm going to do that will teach you everything that you need to know in order to jump into your first game of Dungeons & Dragons. So the goal is, after having finished these first 5 courses, you'll have kind of all of the basic knowledge and understanding that you need in order to play the game, this game that we love so much. Let us begin. So, the first and most important question: what is Dungeons & Dragons? Most people think of D&D as a game. And while it is that, and I'll often refer to it as such, I think, to be honest with you, a more accurate way to describe D&D and to think about D&D is as a story. It's a communal story that you tell with your friends. There are rules to the game, rules that we'll get into a little bit later in further episodes. But above all, it is a story. The setting for this story that you tell with your friends, the people you play with, is a fantasy setting, replete with dragons, monsters, swords and sorcery, heroes, villains, and adventure. But unlike most games that you might play with your friends, there's no real point system or win condition. It's not like a typical game where you might play where the first player to get to 10 points wins, or the first person to get to level 5 is the victor and then the game ends, right? It's more like a let's sit down and act out a play together or write a book together kind of game. There are 2 major roles in this communal story. First, you have the players. That's you and your other friends that you play with the exception of one of those friends. And one of those friends will take on the role of the dungeon master, or the dungeon mistress, if you prefer, as one of my friends does. The players create a character, a role that they want to play in the game. And within reason, it can be just about anything you want. You want to play a dexterous elf who goes into combat with a bow and arrow and maybe an animal companion at their side. You can absolutely do that. Or perhaps you want to be a charismatic rogue who is great at sneaking and stealthing and unlocking locked doors and disarming traps, but who is also able to put a well-placed dagger in the back of their enemies when they're not looking. You could do that. Perhaps you want to be a powerful wizard who hurls fireballs in combat, or conjures fey spirits to do their bidding. Absolutely. Or perhaps you want to be a raging barbarian who runs into battle swinging a 2-handed axe. You could do that. Really, you decide who and what you want to be, and then you simply become that person in the game. Now, as opposed to the players, the dungeon master sets the stage, provides the setting, acts as the referee when it comes to the rules of the game, and assumes the role of all of the characters in the story who aren't you and your friends, the player characters, right? Think of them as the narrator, or maybe the scriptwriter of the story you're going to tell, or maybe even the director of that story, or in reality, maybe all of the above. A typical D&D adventure will last months, depending on how frequently you play, with a single session typically lasting 2 to 4 hours. The DM, the Dungeon Master, will have the outline of a story that they want to guide you, the players, through, replete with plot, adventure, daring, fighting, exploration, intrigue, villains, and, of course, the heroes. That's you. The game ends when the story that the Dungeon Master has planned for you to play through reaches its conclusion. Now, in D&D, unlike other games that you may play, there's no real game board or little pieces to play with or cards or things like that, right? You can use little miniatures like this one to represent your character in game and help you visualize where your characters are spatially in relation to other characters. This is one that I've played with. Her name is Lynn, and she's an elf. She's got a little pet owl there. See, I painted that myself. I was very proud. But you don't have to do that. In fact, a lot of people don't use miniatures at all, and they simply use their imagination to imagine what is going on in the game and in the world. And in fact, you will be doing that a lot of the time, maybe even most of the time, regardless of whether you use these miniatures or not. The only things that you really need in order to play are dice, like this, lots of different kinds of dice, as well as your imagination, some friends to play with. You'll need a character sheet that helps you keep track of your character and all of the different things they can do. And we'll get into that a little bit more in the next video. And you ought to get a copy of the Player's Handbook. This is a book that you can pick up at pretty much any game store, local game store, or you can find it online. And it basically kind of explains all of the rules and everything that you'll need to know in order to play the game. I highly recommend getting yourself a copy, whether, again, a physical copy or I prefer to use personally a digital version. It's available for free at lots of different places. My favorite website is probably dndbeyond.com. They are not a sponsor yet. Maybe one day. So the game is played and the story is told simply in the interaction between the players and the Dungeon Master. The DM will set the stage. They might say something like, "It's a warm and sunny day in the city of Waterdeep. You find yourself sitting at the bar of a tavern called the Wandering Minotaur," etc., etc. Throughout the course of the game, the DM will tell you something that happens in the world, and you tell the DM how you want to react to it. Conversely, you may tell the DM something that you want to do, and the DM would react to it. For example, the DM may say, you're sitting at the bar, and a shady-looking character approaches. In a raspy voice, they whisper, "I'm in need of some muscle. I've got a job, and it might require someone to get their hands dirty. You look like you could handle yourself. Pays pretty well. You interested?" You decide at that point how you would want to reply. You may say, "Actually, I'm new in town. I could use some coin. You don't scare me too much. I'll hear you out." And you follow the shady character into an alley to learn more about the job. Or you may choose to simply ignore them. Or you may decide to pour your drink over their head or even attack the character, right? There's really no limit to what you could do, or maybe more accurately, there's no limit to what you can attempt to do. And that is where the rules come into play. Now, many of the things that you want to do or try to do in-game can be done simply by stating them. I sit down on the chair. I tell the barkeeper that he has a big nose. I walk down the street to the guard tower, right? However, anytime you try to do something that might require a little skill, or that someone else would maybe try to prevent you from doing, it requires a roll of the dice. I want to stab that goblin with my sword, you might say. Okay, the DM would reply, let's see if your swordsmanship skill is sufficient enough to hit it. Roll the dice, And if you roll high enough, you hit. Conversely, you might say, I want to try and persuade the bartender to give me my drinks for free. The DM would reply, all right, let's see how persuasive you are. Roll the dice. Or you might say, I want to jump up on the bar, jump up, grab the chandelier, swing from it, do a backflip on a dismount, land in the doorway, and make my escape from this shady character who I don't trust. All right, let's see how acrobatic you actually are. Roll the dice. Naturally, there are a lot of things about your character that would make you more or less likely to succeed at whatever it is that you're trying to attempt to do. And your success at when you attempt those things will largely depend on your character's physical and mental characteristics that you will help shape. And we're going to get into this more in the next course, 102. But just know for now that you will get to decide what your character is good at and not so good at, right? Among other things. For example, if you have a very strong character, when you try to hit that goblin with your sword, you will get a bonus to the roll of the dice to see if you hit them, and will therefore succeed much more often than a character who is not very strong. If on the other hand, if you're very charismatic, you will get a bonus when you roll the dice to see if you can actually persuade the bartender to give you your drinks for free. If you are very dexterous, then your chandelier swinging escapades are much more likely to succeed compared to someone who is perhaps a little more flat-footed. Your dungeon master will help you determine if the number that you roll on the dice, plus any applicable bonuses, is high enough to succeed at whatever it is that you are attempting to do, or if you fail. Regardless of the outcome, the story will continue forward, and you and the other players and the DM will need to adapt as you kill the goblin or not, or persuade the bartender to give you your drinks for free or not, or if you pull off a stunning 10-point landing from your chandelier swinging, or if instead you fail and fall on one of the tavern tables, smashing it to pieces and coincidentally spilling wine all over the noble lord who was seated there. They might be mad, and you might want to get out of there before a fight breaks out. Unless, of course, a bar fight sounds like a lot of fun, in which case, go for it. Right? One way to think about this is almost maybe more like improv, like an improv comedy show, except for it's not always comedy. Sometimes there's comedy. But a lot of times there's drama or action. And you do something, the DM reacts, and now you decide, okay, that happened, now what do I want to do? So it's a lot of yes and, right? You're basically interacting with each other, playing off each other, and acting and reacting based on what's happening and how the story is evolving. Of course, the equipment your character has access to will also impact your ability to succeed or fail at given tasks. A heavy two-handed sword might do a lot more damage to that goblin than a tiny dagger would, for example. A pocket full of gold coins would help you pay for your drinks should you fail to convince the barkeep to give them to you for free. And some magic boots might help you fly up to that chandelier if your acrobatic skills aren't quite up to snuff. And yes, there are enchanted items of all sorts in the game that you find on your adventures. From magic rings that may turn you invisible, to magic swords and armor that will help you be stronger and perform better in combat, potions to magically heal any wounds you may have received, and bags that never seem to get full no matter how many things you may stuff inside of them. As you progress through the story, you will learn and grow. As you gain experience from your adventures, your character will become more powerful. This experience and growth is represented by player levels. You start the game at level 1, and each time you gain enough experience, you level up. or gain a level which brings with it new abilities, feats, skills, powers, and choices, as you are the one deciding how exactly you want your character to grow. Do they learn a new skill that helps them accomplish something more easily? Do they learn new spells that give them greater power? Do they become stronger so they are more likely to hit their enemies with their weapons? Do they become more wise? Depending on the length of the story that your DM wants to tell with you, the story may end when you're level 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 or anywhere in between, although level 20 is the max level that a character in D&D can attain. Of course, if the story ends and you all decide that you would like to start another story, another adventure with the same characters that you've been playing and you haven't hit level 20 yet, you and your friends can always decide to start another story with these same characters and keep growing and keep exploring. Or you could start over, create a new character, and have a completely new adventure. It's up to you. Of course, the reward for vanquishing your foes and thwarting an evil villain in their attempts to overthrow the king, or plunder the depths of a dungeon and defeat the monsters inside so as to claim their treasure for your own, is never quite as sweet if there's no risk of failure along the way. And yes, you may fail in your quest. In fact, it is almost certain that you will fail many times throughout your story and adventure, many small failings and some larger failings, including and up to death. When you engage your enemies in combat, they will fight back. And depending on how hardy your character is, how well protected they are with armor and other magical equipment, and how the dice are rolling that particular day, your character may get knocked unconscious. And if not healed by one of your companions, they could die. When that happens, it doesn't have to be the end of your character's story in this game. There are ways through powerful magical spells to bring even the dead back to life in Dungeons & Dragons, although not all players have access to these resurrection-type spells, and they can be fairly expensive to cast. Thus, it's important to exercise caution. Make sure you equip yourselves with the best weapons and armor that your money can buy. Pick the right skills and spells that will help you be a powerful combatant, or heal your allies, or yourself for that matter, when you get hurt. And always consider ways to get out of a sticky situation using your wits and your words if it looks like fighting might be a bad idea. You could always try to sneak around that minotaur in the maze after all, and you'll never know if you couldn't convince that dragon to not eat you unless you at least try to persuade them otherwise, right? That concludes Course 101, Intro to D&D. Please be sure to attend our next lesson, Course 102, where we will guide you through the very first step of getting ready to play, creating a character. Now, fair warning, it's going to get a lot more complicated from here. There are a lot of rules to this game, but trust me, it will be worth it. If you take the time to learn, this game can and will provide you with countless hours of a lot of fun and a lot of fond memories with your friends. Of course, as always, my office door is open. So please, if you have any questions, just ask in the comments down below and I will do my best to answer. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss any future lessons. That's all for today. Thanks. I hope you have a fantastic day and to see you very soon.